Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always, told how to voice radio. So today, I'm going to be bringing you another winning deck list. Now, I do deck lists on this channel occasionally, not all the time. I pick my moment. But what I like to do when I bring you deck lists, rather than, hey, here's some rubbishy deck list which I knocked up, I like to bring you winning deck lists which have taken at least one tournament by storm. And today, we look at Tord Reklev's winning water box deck that got first place at Norway Nationals, and I think it's an interesting enough deck to warrant having a look at. Now, as I always say with these, I take no credit whatsoever for the deck list. This was Tord Reklev's deck list. He's the one that made it. He's the genius, so all I'm doing is doing an analysis of his deck, and as he's put the list and the picture into the public domain, I think commenting on it is not the worst thing ever. Tord, if you're listening and you hate me for this, you're my friend on Facebook, so just send me some hate. Tord, he's a lovely chap. He knocked me out of the ECC in 2014, and I still think he's a lovely chap. That's how much of a lovely chap Tord Reklev actually is. Now, the reason I'm keeping doing these winning deck lists, there's a lot of nationals going on at the moment, and the response to the previous ones, shall we say, has been incredibly good. So, let's take a look. This is a water box list, and starting off with potentially the main attacker, or at least in most matchups, the first attacker, we have got Seismitoad EX. 2 energy, and he gets to do Quaking Punch, 30 damage, and your opponent cannot play item cards next turn. This is a Pokemon which has been around for a very long time. He's had a variety of partners. He's been good for a very long time. The thing is, this deck actually plays an awful lot of water energy. So what you can do is you can actually use Grenade Hammer. 130 damage plus 30 damage to each of 2 of your benched Pokemon. Although, as we're going to see in a moment, with Rough Seas, that basically means 130 damage, no downside. Now, Seismitoad, here's the thing with Seismitoad, you've got to pick your moment. Seismitoad is a very, very good Pokemon. He's got Trainer Lock, Item Lock I suppose it would be called nowadays. And if you're against decks like Night March, Item Lock may well win you the game. But in other matchups, it's not going to win you the game. You have to be very, very good at knowing when to Item Lock and when to take the KOs. Now, this is far from a nuanced look at it, but the most I can tell you for the time being is you drop the Item Lock when you know that either you can give them a turn of Item Lock and they're not going to set up well enough to beat you, or you drop the Item Lock when you don't need Item Lock anymore because you can just take enough prizes to win the prize race. Nice and simple. Now, there are other attackers in this deck. First of all, we have Glaceon EX. Now, Glaceon EX has a whole bunch of, well, not a whole bunch, it's got 2 attacks, and one of them is a little bit rubbish. I don't mean to be rude with this. I don't mean to be insulting. Glaceon is not particularly good with his first attack, but that's not the one we're focused on. Now, I'm not saying Second Bite will never be good, I'm saying it will rarely be good. Crystal Ray is the one we're focused on. 70 damage, and during your opponent's next turn, prevent all damage done to Glaceon EX by attacks from evolved Pokemon. That's Mega Evolutions and regular evolutions. Now, there's a whole bunch of stuff this is good for, but take something like a Vespiquen deck. Your Seismitoad EX is weak to grass, and he's not the only one. So what do you do instead? Well, you come along and you use Crystal Ray, and then your opponent cannot attack with Vespiquen, or quite often a lot of their other attackers as well. A lot of Vespiquen decks only play something like a Baby or Non-EX Eviltal, and that is most likely not going to win a fight against a Glaceon EX. So he's good for that, and that's basically his only use, but that's okay. Now, we've also got Regice, another Pokemon which has only got 1 use. Again, he's got a first attack, it can paralyze, but we're looking at Resistance Blizzard. 3 energy, 70 damage, and during your opponent's next turn, prevent all effects of attacks, including damage, done by Pokemon EX. So if you're facing down something like, I don't know, a Mega Rayquaza deck, which generally tends to play just EX Pokemon, then you can bring out something like a Regice and your opponent can't do anything. Now, of course, they can use things like Lysander to bring Pokemon off of your bench, but of course, If you're able to maneuver into a position where you've only got a Regice out and your opponent's only got EX Pokemon, you will win the game because there is nothing that they can do. The other Pokemon that's a little bit of a one-off, a little bit of a niche here, we've got Articuno. Now, Chilling Sigh can save you a turn here and there, but we're looking at Tri-Edge. 20 damage, flip 3 coins, 40 more for each head. For free energy, that is not an amazing attack, ladies and gentlemen. But we're not so worried about the attack. We're worried about the ancient trait Delta Plus. You KO a Pokemon, you get an extra prize card. Now, sometimes you can maneuver yourself into a position where, I don't know, let's say against a Joltik. 30 HP, so you put a Fighting Fury Belt on Articuno, you're doing 30 damage, taking 2 prizes. Against something like a Froakie that's got 60 HP, you hit 1 heads, you take 2 prizes. If you're really feeling lucky, you could even try and attack a Shaymini X with this, and with a Fighting Fury Belt, if you hit 2 out of 3 heads, you do exactly 110 damage, and you get the KO, and then you take 3 prizes. He ain't your main attacker, ladies and gentlemen, but he can swing the prize race in your favour. When I say swing the prize race, I mean literally get you to 6 prizes before your opponent. If you all knock out 1 Pokemon in turn, you fall behind in the prize race. Articuno allows you to turn around and go, well, we're taking 1 at a time, but now I've gone and taken 2 prizes, now I'm going to win the prize race. Now, the other Pokemon here, we've got a Manaphy EX. And Manaphy EX has 2 important uses. Number 1, we do like the ability Aqua Tube. Free retreat to any of your Pokemon that have water energy attached to them. We've already seen this deck plays a variety of attackers. Seismitoad, Glaceon, Articuno, Regice. And Manaphy allows you to retreat from one into another. If your opponent tries to use a basic against Glaceon EX, maybe you can throw out a Regice if they're an EX and take them down that way, for argument's sake. There are different things that you can do, or indeed just retreat into an Articuno and try and take an extra prize or 2. These are the kind of things you can do, and that is far from an exhaustive list of what you can do with Manaphy EX's Aqua Tube. But we also like this attack Mineral Pump. Yeah, 60 damage isn't great, but you heal 30 damage from each of your benched Pokemon. This is really, really good against Trevenant Break's Silent Fear attack. They place 3 damage counters on each of your Pokemon, you heal 30 from all of your bench, and then essentially Silent Fear does 30 to the active. It's not doing very much, ladies and gentlemen. It is not going to have a particularly good time. Now, there are other niche uses for Manaphy EX, but really it's the Trevenant matchup and it's a free retreat. And Tord chooses to play 2 of these Manaphys, and the reason is I can only assume if you have it prized against Trevenant, that is a very, very bad thing indeed. Now, the other Pokemon are here really just for setting up. 1 Hooper EX because you get to search for free Pokemon EX when you use it. And of course, other than Articuno and Regice, it's all Pokemon EX. You can search for a Seismitoad, a Manaphy, and a Shaymin, and that basically gets your setup. 2 Shaymin EX, it's a setup ability. It helps you to draw cards. 2 here. You don't want to be playing many Shaymin here because you want to be trying to stop your opponent playing the game. And this deck stops your opponent playing the game. Seismitoad to block trainers. Glaceon EX from the new Fates Collide expansion. And this is one of the big changes that has been made in the recent Waterbox list. To stop evolution decks. Regice to stop Mega EXs. Or regular EXs, in fact. Any EXs will do. So Shaymin here, you don't want to be benching multiple of these. I would like a 3rd Shaymin EX if I were playing this deck, but it's not your ideal starter. You don't want to bench too many of them, and you're playing a Hooper as well. You can probably get away with 2. Since Tord won Nationals with this deck, I think it's safe to say he can get away with 2. Now, possibly the most important card in this deck, or at least the card which really changes it from not viable to viable, is Max Elixir. We saw this with the Genesect deck I looked at recently. Look at the top 6 cards of your deck, find a basic energy, and attach it to one of your benched basic Pokemon. this deck only plays basic Pokemon. What that means is that you can just go ahead and get extra energy attachments. You notice this deck does not play any double colorless energy. It just plays 12 basic water. Why is that? Because you don't want to give your opponent the opportunity to get rid of your double colorless using something like, for argument's sake, a promo Jirachi. And so you can get rolling. It means you can use attacks like Grenade Hammer. It means you're not vulnerable to anything that gets rid of special energy. And it means you get extra energy attachments so you can get rolling nice and quickly. This is what makes the deck. Why 12 water energy? This seems to be most of the list. Now, we saw 11 in the Genesect list I looked at recently. 12 seems to be the number. And David Hockman, and speaking of which, if you're watching this, David, he complained that the last one I did was actually a second place list, and I called it a winning list. Here is a winning list. It won Nationals. I hope you're happy. He's made some tables looking at all the numbers, and essentially, if you play 12 energy and 4 max elixir, for 12 basic, you can expect to hit 3 of the 4, and that sounds all right by me. So let's have a look at some other things. For Professor Sycamore, it's the most aggressive supporter in the deck. It is, well, in the game, in fact. It allows you to just discard your hand and draw 7 cards. It helps you set up, and this is a deck that a lot of the time, if it sets up, it can win. 3 copies of N because it's good in the early game, you get 6 new cards, but it's good in the mid to late game. If your opponent takes a lead, then you can go ahead and slow them down and make a comeback. Both players shuffle their hand into their decks, draw a number of cards equal to the prize cards remaining. So if your opponent's taken 4 prizes and you've only taken 2, then you both shuffle, you get 4 cards, they get 2. It allows you to make comebacks. 2 Lysander because it's Lysander. It's such a good card, and especially with a deck like this where you can bring an EX into the active and block it with Regice, or you can bring something into the active and take extra prizes with Articuno, or you can pull up a high retreat Pokemon and use Quaking Punch to stop them trying to retreat it with a Floatstone, or use a Switch or something of that nature to get some cheeky prizes. Most decks play 2 Lysander, it's pretty standard, but this deck more than any other, I sometimes am a fan of going down to 1 Lysander. Oh my goodness, not in this deck. There are too many fun things you can use. Like, for instance, as I've said, Lysandering up a high retreat Pokemon, and then using Quaking Punch to stop them retreating or switching with Floatstone or Switch, or getting cheeky prizes of Articuno. And then there are 3 supporters where Tord plays one-offs. And these are all very standard. So the Rosic gets rid of a special energy or a tool, get rid of something like a double colorless or a strong energy, or you can get rid of something like a Fighting Fury belt, which a lot of people now play to get ridiculous HPs on their basics. 1 AZ to just pick up one of your Pokemon. You can use it to reuse a Shaman, for instance, or just to pick up a Pokemon that's about to be KO'd, so that your opponent doesn't get a prize off it. And 1 Hex Maniac because we all have those turns where we really want to stop our opponent playing a Shaman, or where we want to, for instance, maybe we're playing against a Genesect deck and we want to turn their Bronzongs off for a turn or 2. These are cards which are basically a one-of in every deck because they're too darn good not to be. 4 Versus Seeker because it's Versus Seeker, and I say this in pretty much every video where I mention Versus Seeker, and I mean this very sincerely. Unless you are trainer locking yourself, I'm looking at you, Vileplume, you play 4 VS Seeker. It's too good. You might notice that every list I show you at the moment plays 4 Versus Seeker. Well, you know what? They should. The only other kind of tricky card here, the only other unusual card, is Energy Switch, a card that's been around, I don't want to make a blanket statement, but it may well have been legal for the entire history of the Pokemon trading card game. And yet it very, very rarely sees play, but in a deck like this, it's wunderbar. What it allows you to do is just move a basic energy from one Pokemon to another. But of course, when you're playing entirely basic Pokemon, when you are playing Max Elixir and when you're playing Manaphy EX, the deck takes on a whole new spin. So for instance, you can do things like play Max Elixir onto a bench Pokemon, then switch to your active to get turn 1 Quaking Punch. Or you can have a Pokemon in the active, you can attach an energy, use Manaphy EX to free retreat with his Aqua Tube ability, and then play Energy Switch to then switch that energy back to the Pokemon you actually want it on. Little tricks like this. And one of my favourite things about this deck, the attackers, yeah, you know, there's a one of attackers and you've got options, but the list is very streamlined. 4 Sycamore, 4 VS Seeker. And then if we look at the rest, it's very straightforward. Free Fighting Fury Belt, it's the best tool. You only play basic Pokemon. They get 40 more HP and they do 10 more damage. It makes perfect sense. 4 Ultra Ball, because it allows you to search for any Pokemon, including, of course, Hooper EX. And that's what you'll mainly do on your first Ultra Ball. Ultra Ball for Hooper, Hooper to grab. I mean, in a lot of matchups, it will be a Seismitoad, a Manaphy, and a Shaman, although you, of course, could use it for other things as well. 4 Trainers Mail, because, well, you've got trainers that you want to grab, things like Sycamore and Max Elixir and stuff like that. Trainers Mail, in most decks, to be honest with you, is a 4 of, because it's just that good. And then finally, Rough Seas. 4 Rough Seas. It allows you to heal 30 damage from each of your water Pokemon, or lightning, I suppose, but you're not playing any lightning Pokemon. And again, you're playing 4 of these. Against something like a Trevenant, you can either get Rough Seas or you can get Manaphy, and then the Trevenant player is just really not doing enough damage. In any matchup, and you play the 4 because it allows you to what we call win the Stadium War. So if your opponent puts down the first stadium, then unless they're playing 5 stadiums, you will win the Stadium War, or I suppose if you have to discard one at some point. So, quite frankly, I like this list. And I'm not just going to do a winning deck analysis of every deck that I see. I'm going to do a winning deck analysis of good decks and decks which I think are worth talking about. If we look at this deck here, it's a superbly well-made list, and it did very, very well. So I thought it was worth having a look at. Hopefully I've explained the list well. Hopefully I have enlightened you just a little bit. If I haven't, well, that's what the comment section is for. I should also, stress just again, it's not my list, it's Tord's list. I do not seek to get any, I'm not trying to take the credit for what he did here, but I am saying, as I say in all of my videos, if a list has been put into the public domain, then I think it's kind of fair to have an analysis thereof. But just to be clear, it's Tord's list. It ain't mine. You know the deal, ladies and gentlemen. Click that like button. Hopefully you liked the video. Click it. Go on. Click it. Go on. Have you clicked it yet? Good. And of course, click that subscribe button if you haven't, and get a friend to subscribe on your behalf if you are already subscribed. And of course, as always, the most important thing, look after yourselves until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.